Okay, we're live. Namaskar, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host kushalmehra. Today we're going to talk about Aryan Invasion. This is my second discussion on Aryan Invasion with Abhijit Chavda. Hi, Abhijit. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kushal. Thank you so much for having me again. It's great to be here with you.
All right. So, for guys who are watching this for the first time, what we are going to do is we're going to start with a small little recap and a summary where I'm going to request Abhijit to talk about what we had covered in the last time, so that if you're watching this and you've not watched the previous podcast, so you at least get an idea, a basic idea of what we have covered till now in the last discussion. And then what we'll do is we'll take the discussion further in lieu of certain developments that had come in the newspapers recently in regards to certain genetic studies that have come up. And the studies have not been gotten out, but we are only reacting to the excerpts in the papers. So Abhijit, take it forward from here.
Thank you, Kushal. So, for the sake of those who are new to this topic or those who haven't heard our previous conversation, so I'm going to start at the very beginning and go to the root of how this entire matter, the Aryan Invasion Theory, started. It may be slightly longer, bear with me. So, let me begin with the backstory. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a civilization, an ancient civilization, which has existed for thousands of years and whose origins go back so far back that they are lost in time. So I'm obviously talking about India. So over thousands of years, India's civilization developed a beautiful and diverse culture, which manifested itself in the form of amazing architecture, and yoga, and numerous forms of dance and martial arts, and a beautiful and sophisticated system of classical music. The civilization developed the perfect, most precise and logical language, Sanskrit. It developed language, literature, and poetry before the rest of the world even knew what those concepts meant. Now, the people of ancient India, they discovered and developed advanced mathematics, science, astronomy, and technology and engineering capabilities, which were very advanced for that time. And over the millennia, India's civilization went on from being primarily agricultural and pastoral to being the world's first urban industrialized society. So the Indian civilization was spread out over a vast geographical expanse. It included large parts of present-day Afghanistan, Pakistan. It included all of present-day northern and western India, central India, and more. And it accounted for the majority of the world's GDP at the time. India's civilization gave rise to self-governing city-states and vast empires. It had emperors and kings and queens and warriors and saints, but most importantly, it had scholars. India had innumerable universities and temples throughout its entire geographical expanse. Universities such as Takshashila, Nalanda, Tilhara, Vikramashila, Pushpagiri, and so many more. And the temples, they served as schools and as feeder systems to the universities, which provided higher education. And the universities had vast libraries that contained knowledge and historical records that were passed on over thousands of years. And then, as we know, came the Islamic invasions at a time when India was going through a phase of being fragmented into a large number of small petty kingdoms, and India's warriors had become too civilized and too chivalrous for their own good. So, to make a long story short, Sindh fell, Gandhara fell, and the invaders gradually began taking control over India. And they went on to perpetrate the worst genocide the world has ever witnessed, a genocide that went on for several hundred years. Well over 100 million Indians, probably well over 200 million, possibly, were massacred during this period, and millions more were enslaved and transported to Arabia and Central Asia. The invaders did their best to eradicate India's culture and civilization. They destroyed most of the temples and all of the universities. They burned down the great libraries. Nalanda's library is said to have burned for months. So just imagine how much knowledge was lost, including, importantly, all the records of India's past, most of the records of India's past. And like Tolkien said, history became legend, legend became myth, and things that should never have been forgotten were lost. So these were India's dark ages. And then came the British. The British did not come to India for charity. They came for plunder. And the missionaries they brought along came to India's shores with a singular purpose, that of converting the people to Christianity. So when the British came to India, they found a traumatized, devastated, brutalized society, one that had long ceased to function the way it had evolved to, the way it was designed to. A society that had lost its history, a society that was suffering from both amnesia and post-traumatic stress disorder. So the British took advantage of this, and they proceeded to write their own version of India's history with the objective of furthering their dominion over the land and its people. They built narratives that created fault lines in India's society, and these they exploited to the fullest. Basically, it was their strategy of divide and rule. So they destroyed whatever was left of India's millennia-old education system and introduced a specially designed system of education in India, one that was designed to deracinate Indians, to stifle their creativity and their intellect and their ability to think critically, and to make them reliant on the English language. So there's no emphasis on learning in this system of education. The emphasis is on rote memorization and on absolute, unquestioning obedience. The system is essentially designed to mass produce clerks and peons, not leaders or intellectuals. And this exact system of education is still used in every Indian school today. And the colonial history of India, the same 19th century history of India, is still taught in every Indian history textbook today. And that is the tragedy of modern India, and that's what brings up the topic at hand, the Aryan Invasion Theory. So how did this theory originate? So as the Europeans began visiting India, or rather when they reconnected with India after a long hiatus, sometime in the 16th century, they began noticing similarities between the languages of India and those of Persia and those of Europe. There are striking similarities in vocabulary, grammar, etc. that are too frequent and too consistent to be coincidental. So the term Indo-European languages first appeared in the early 19th century, and Indo-European studies began as an academic discipline around this time. And in the 1850s, Max Müller, a German Orientalist who lived in Britain for most of his life, he introduced the notion of two Aryan races, a Western race and an Eastern race. And he proposed that these two branches of the Aryans migrated somewhere from Central Asia into Europe and into India, respectively. So Müller ascribed greater prominence and value to the Western branch of the Aryans, of this hypothetical Aryan race. And he hypothesized that the Eastern branch of the Aryan race was more powerful than the indigenous Indian natives, who he believed to be backward and easy to conquer. So this is the genesis of the Aryan Invasion Theory. Then in the 19th century, late 19th century, I believe, the British divided the Indian people into two categories, Aryans and Dravidians, based primarily on perceived differences of skin color and language. And they introduced the idea that the people of South India are a separate race, the Dravidians, and are descended from the original natives of India. And he hypothesized that these people were subjugated by the invading Aryans. Then sometime in the 1920s, I believe, the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were discovered in Sindh and excavated by the British. And they called this the Indus Valley Civilization. So in light of this discovery, the theory was modified to say that the Indus Valley Civilization was a Dravidian civilization, and it was destroyed by the Aryans. So then, what exactly is the Aryan Invasion Theory? It's a narrative that seeks to answer the question of the origin of the Indian people and India's civilization and languages. It has three main components. Its central thesis has three main components. Firstly, that India's original inhabitants were Dravidians, dark-skinned people, and they built a highly peaceful, highly developed civilization, urban civilization in Western India, the so-called Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. Secondly, that India was invaded and conquered from the west from the northwest by a nomadic people called the Indo-Aryans around 1500 BCE. These Indo-Aryans were of European origin, hence light-skinned or white-skinned, and they spoke Vedic Sanskrit. And they went on to destroy the indigenous Dravidian civilization and forced them to migrate to the south of India. And thirdly, the third component of this theory is that these Indo-Aryans went on to compose the Vedas and imposed Hinduism and the caste system upon the Dravidians and other people, other tribals, and other indigenous people of India. So what's the problem with the Aryan invasion theory? The problem is very simple. There is very little, there's no evidence to support it. Archaeologists have failed to discover a single sign or evidence of an invasion after more than a century of searching. And there are no signs of violence. There's no evidence of any kind of destruction. There's no evidence of fire anywhere. There's no ash. There's no soot. There's no evidence of battles or massacres. There's nothing, basically. And because of this, in the late 20th century, this theory was further modified. It's now called the Indo-Aryan migration theory. And this iteration of the theory says that the Aryans migrated peacefully into India, settled down, and then imposed their foreign culture and religion, Hinduism, upon the Dravidians, and forced them to migrate to India's south. And again, this modified version of the theory has the same problem. There's no evidence to support it. People claim there's evidence, but it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. So this begs the question: what's the alternative to the Aryan invasion theory? Do we have a better theory? So suppose there are two explanations for an occurrence. The explanation that requires the least speculation is usually the more likely explanation. The simpler explanation is usually the more likely explanation. And the more assumptions you have to make, the more unlikely your explanation is. This is logic. This is a problem-solving principle called Occam's razor. So it's clear that a simpler answer to the question of the origin of India's people and its culture and civilization and languages, etc., is that they all originate within India itself. This is a very simple explanation for the question. So this is called variously the indigenous Aryans theory or the out of India theory. And this theory basically says two things. Firstly, that there's no difference between the so-called Aryans and the so-called Dravidians. In other words, they are genetically and culturally the same. And secondly, it says that India's culture and religion, Hinduism, and languages and civilization all developed within the geographical expanse of greater India itself. They weren't imported from outside. So is there any evidence that supports this theory, the out of India theory? As it happens, there's plenty of evidence. So there's archaeological evidence, there's evidence of cultural continuity over thousands of years, from the Harappan times until today. There's geological evidence, there's hydrological evidence, there's literary evidence, genetic evidence, and there is evidence, unmistakable evidence of westward migration of ancient Indians out of India in ancient times. So let me quickly, hopefully, go through this, recap this. So firstly, let's look at the archaeological evidence, an outline of that. It's well known by now that there are more than 500 ancient archaeological sites on the banks of an ancient dried up river in Western India and parts of what's now known as Pakistan. Some of these ancient sites are extremely old. They have been excavated, and radiocarbon dating has been done of various artifacts found over there. And for example, Rakhi in Haryana is found to be approximately 8,500 years old. And Birana, which is also in Haryana, is found to be approximately 9,500 years old, possibly even older. And excavating some of the other sites, most of which are unexplored, could prove that the civilization is even older than that. And the ancient river that I mentioned is, in all likelihood, is Saraswati. It fits no other bill. That's the only river that no longer exists. So the Saraswati is mentioned extensively in ancient Indian literature, including in the Rig Veda, which is India's oldest known text. And the latest scientific studies of this ancient riverbed indicate that the Saraswati started declining approximately around 6000 BCE due to a course diversion upstream. It used to be the same as the Sutlej River in the past, long ago. So this indicates that the Rig Veda was probably composed before 6000 BCE when the river first started declining, because the Rig Veda mentions this river extensively, and it mentions a mighty river in its prime, not a river that's in decline. So this is very strong evidence that the Aryan invasions, the Aryan invasion theories claim that the Rig Veda was composed after 15,000 BCE is false. So this raises serious questions about the validity of the Aryan invasion theory. Apart from this, there is extensive evidence that many of the traditions and customs prevalent in the ancient Indus Valley civilization still continue to exist in India, such as yoga, the namaste greeting, and the Shivalinga and Yoni, the use of Sindura in...
You're back on. I think there's something...
Okay, I can see you again, yeah. Okay, great. So let me continue. So these and many other aspects of of contemporary Hinduism and Indian culture originated in the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization. So this shows that modern India is a continuation of that ancient civilization. It proves that the old culture wasn't destroyed and supplanted with a foreign culture. It still exists. So that's the archaeological evidence. Now, if you look at genetics, let me explain what a haplogroup is very quickly. It's nothing but a lineage, a genetic lineage, a bloodline. It's an extended family, all of whose members are descended from a single common ancestor who typically lived several thousand years ago. So there's a very famous haplogroup called R1A1A, which is also known as RM17. And this happens to be the world's most successful extended family. It has possibly over 1 billion members. And it's spread all over Eurasia. Its members are found in high concentrations in India, in Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, Ukraine, but it's closely associated with the Indo-European languages across Eurasia. And in India, this haplogroup or this lineage is identified as the lineage that represents the Indo-Aryan people. So genetic research shows that this ancient lineage originated in India at least 15,000 years ago. This proves that the Indo-Aryan people have lived in India for at least 15,000 years, clearly. And this obviously invalidates the Aryan invasion theory. And it also proves that the hundreds of millions of members of this family who live all across the world today, people living in Russia, Europe, etc., and people such as the ancient Vikings, Normans, Scythians, etc., they all descended from one single male ancestor who lived in India about at least 15,000 years ago. So this indicates that not only did the Indo-Aryan people originate in India 15,000 years ago at least, but also that they expanded out of India and settled in lands far to the west, in Europe. So this thoroughly invalidates the Aryan invasion theory. And genetic studies also show that the so-called Aryan and Dravidian people, the so-called northern Indian people and southern Indian people are genetically alike, more or less the same. It shows that this haplogroup R1A1A is found in high concentrations in North Indians and South Indians, in the so-called high castes and low castes, in tribal people, etc. So it's everywhere. So this again shows that the myth or the Aryan Dravidian divide is actually false, right? So that's about the Aryan Dravidian divide. Then there is literary evidence for westward migration of Indians in the Vedic text called the Bodhyayana Shrota Sutra. And there is archaeological evidence of westward Indo-Aryan migration in places like Syria, in Turkey, with the Mitanni kingdom, whose aristocracy was Indo-Aryan. They spoke Sanskrit. And we have found clay tablets in Turkey which invoke Vedic gods, Indra, Mitra, etc., which are dated to around 1400 BCE. And so there's a lot of evidence of Indo-Aryans migrating westwards, archaeological evidence. And there's even evidence from Egypt. So around around 1600 BCE, Egypt was invaded from the north, and it was conquered by people that they called the Hyksos, or rulers of foreign lands. Now, these people, they used the horse and the chariot in warfare, and there is strong evidence that their aristocracy also was Indo-Aryan, just like the Mitanni people of Syria and Anatolia. And they were technologically more advanced, and most importantly, they practiced horse burials, which is a signature of the Indo-Aryan people, of the ancient Indo-Aryans. So we have evidence of ancient Indo-Aryans ruling Egypt about 1600 BCE. So there's a lot of archaeological evidence of westward migration of Indo-Europeans, and there is also genetic evidence of westward Indo-European migration, which I'll not go into because it will take too long. And then there is mythological evidence, like there's a goddess, Rigvedic goddess called Danu, which connects the people of India and the ancient people of Ireland, because they also have a goddess with the same name who also happens to be a river goddess. And genetic evidence also corroborates this fact that the R1A1A haplogroup is found in Ireland even today. So this is evidence of Indo-Aryan people migrating westwards all the way to Ireland. So it's clear that there's a lot of archaeological, linguistic, literary, etc., and genetic evidence that shows that clearly debunks the Aryan invasion theory. And all this evidence taken together proves that the Indo-Aryan people originated in the Indian subcontinent, and therefore so did the Indo-Aryan languages. It proves that the Vedic people and the Vedic civilization and the Indus Valley civilization, they are one and the same. It proves that the Rig Veda was composed before 6000 BCE and not, as is claimed by the Aryan invasion theory, around 1500 BCE. It proves that rather than being a religion of invaders, Hinduism is native to India. And it also proves that the Rig Veda probably is the world's oldest known literature. It also proves that the North Indians and South Indians are the same genetically and culturally. The Aryan-Dravidian divide has no basis in fact. The high caste, low caste divide also has no basis in fact. It's also a myth. It proves that Indian civilization is a continuous, unbroken tradition that goes back to at least 9,000 years before present. And this clearly makes India the world's oldest continuously existing civilization, older than Mesopotamia or Egypt. So this means that India is the true cradle of civilization. And it proves that Indo-Aryans carrying R1A1A lineages expanded westwards thousands of years ago, conquering lands all the way to the westernmost reaches of Europe. So all of this evidence taken together comprehensively debunks the Aryan invasion theory. And yet, this avalanche of evidence has been studiously ignored for decades by Western academics as well as India's state-sponsored Marxist academicians, and historians, and the media. So that's a recap, I hope. I hope I've covered everything of what we discussed the last time.
Yeah, we pretty much covered everything. So just for anybody who's going to watch this for the first time, so if you want to look at the archaeological evidence, I think you should read the book.
Sorry, I'm not getting you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear now.
Yeah, sorry. So for everybody who's watching this or is going to watch it later or is going to listen to it later, so if you want to look at the archaeological evidences that Abhijit has spoken about, I would recommend you read books of B.B. Lal. I think he has covered them most comprehensively. The linguistic aspect that Abhijit talked about, I think when it comes to the out of India theory, when it comes to going in depth in linguistics, I think Shrikant Talagiri has done the most work in that. So you could read all the 3 books, or if you don't want to read Shrikant Talagiri's books, just read the last one. Let me just look at the name. I think it's the Rig Veda and the Avesta, the Final Evidence. So that's Shrikant Talagiri's book. And obviously now today, why we are doing this is specifically for the third aspect that Abhijit spoke about, that is genetics. Now, recently, I think it was in July, Abhijit, right, when Tony Joseph wrote that article and you had written a rebuttal to it in India Facts. Now, yes. What I want you to do is, for the benefit of everybody who's going to hear this or view this, first explain what Tony Joseph's claims were. Because our last podcast, we literally ended specifically about this research where we spoke about the Deccan College research, and we were like, we are excited what comes out of that. And
Yes.
obviously the paper has not come out, but Tony Joseph claims that he has spoken to the scientists who are involved and he has given his version. So what we should do is science is always about presenting the other side's argument first according to what they stand for, and then we give it a rebuttal. So what I want you to do is first you can present what Tony Joseph is claiming in his article, and then you can go about saying what you think is wrong with it. So go ahead.
So Tony Joseph's article, I think it appeared not very recently. It was maybe a year ago or something like that. So basically what Tony Joseph did was he latched on to a couple of papers, scientific papers that came out around the time. And he used that to claim that the Aryan invasion debate has been settled. So I don't exactly have the details unless I open the website. But see, basically what he's claiming is that there is some kind of genetic evidence that shows that the R1A1A haplogroup originated not in India, but somewhere more recently to the west of India, maybe around the region of Iran or something. That was one of his points. And he also made some ridiculous claims like 17%, like Indian women also have the R1A1A haplogroup, which happens to be a patrilineal haplogroup, so they can't have it. So I wrote an article rebutting Tony Joseph. And actually the recent development is that, so let me go back and start from the beginning of this as well. So in 2015, what happened was that in Rakhi, a team of archaeologists led by Deccan College's Dr. Vasant Shinde, they discovered 4 skeletons, very well preserved, and I believe they're nearly 4,500-year-old skeletons. And so these 4 skeletons were discovered. They were in very good condition, and fortunately, this team became the first team ever to successfully extract DNA from ancient Indus Valley civilization bones. So after that, what followed was a very long wait for the results to be published, and we still don't know when they'll be published. I mean, there's a lot of speculation in the media that it's coming out soon, but I really don't know, because this wait has been going on for like 3 years. I think the samples were sent to South Korea and to Harvard for analysis. I think India doesn't have the facilities for analyzing ancient DNA, probably. So the samples were sent abroad, and they're also going to do some facial reconstruction of using the skulls. So what's happening is that people are awaiting the results, and recently, I think a month or less than 2 months ago, a new article came out. It was by somebody called Kai Fries. I don't know who he is. He seems to be an expert of some sort. I mean, a lot of experts have popped up in the past, ever since this discovery happened. I mean, after this discovery happened, after the Rakhi bones were discovered and sent for analysis, what happened was that the entire ecosystem went into some kind of a panic. They began publishing all kinds of articles, all supporting the Aryan Invasion Theory in some way or the other. And basically what these articles are doing is that they try to misinform the public and bury facts and scientific evidence under the deluge of propaganda. What they do is they latch on to the smallest, most incremental news story that comes out about Rakhi or whatever, and they twist it and misinterpret it in some way that supports the Aryan Invasion Theory. So, like you said, I had written a couple of articles. One about one debunking what Tony Joseph said. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly what he said. It was just ridiculous. Okay, but so I have debunked that. I also wrote another article in Swarajya, I believe, also which debunked another article that came out. And recently, this new article has come out at the end of August by somebody called Kai Fries. So let me go into that. So this person called Kai Fries, he claims that the Rakhi DNA results will unsettle Hindutva nationalists or something like that. And in the paper, he cites a whole range of experts and influential people: Max Muller, Dayananda Saraswati, Sanjeev Sanyal, David Reich, David Frawley, Romila Thapar, etc., to appear very balanced and rational. And the article suffers from a number of glaring deficiencies, which I'll just outline. So first of all, the author says that he basically references a piece of research that has not been published yet. Right? He says that the authors, Dr. Shinde and Dr. Rai, I believe, they have communicated verbally the results to him over several telephone interviews. Now, you know what? Unpublished research is extremely confidential, especially research that is of very high value like this. And so it's kept secret before it's published. No scientist will ever disclose the results, especially to a journalist or to anybody else. That doesn't happen. It's not ever disclosed in any form, even verbally, before the results are officially published in a scientific journal. So it's therefore hard to believe the author's claims that Dr. Shinde and Dr. Rai have generously made him privy to the results of the study. And the author claims that he drew his conclusions based on conversations. Well, obviously, it's very hard to believe that. So I concluded that the claims of the author are basically untrue. They can't be trusted. Secondly, the article, what it does is that it presents the DNA profile of a single individual as being representative of the entire Indus Valley civilization's population. So what's happened is that they were able to successfully sequence the DNA from only one sample. There were 4 skeletons, but either some of the samples got contaminated or the DNA was too degraded. So only one sample was able to be sequenced properly. So we have so that's what we hear. Okay, so there's one sample that has been sequenced. So how can one sample, one individual, be representative of an entire civilization's population? So we know that the Indus Valley civilization had at around its peak around 5 million people. Its population was around 5 million people. So clearly, you will need a large number of DNA samples to form a good idea of the genetic profile of this entire population, because it's a statistical thing. One person doesn't represent a whole population. There may be outliers, aberrations, etc. So clearly one needs to study at least 100, 200, several hundred DNA samples collected from across the entire civilization's geography, from different parts of the civilization, in order to form a reasonably good idea of its inhabitants' genetic profiles and variations. A single possibly partial DNA sample is not adequate. So clearly this invalidates the author's sweeping conclusions that the result is going to, so it basically, that it will unsettle the so-called Hindutva nationalists. So it invalidates his claim. And then there's also another piece of research that came out recently that says that burials in the Indus Valley civilization probably represent first-generation immigrants to the civilization. So what we know is that burial and cremation both happened in the Indus Valley civilization society. We know that today all Hindus, they cremate their dead. And obviously this comes on from a very long ancient history, which we have evidence of in the Indus Valley civilization. There's evidence of burial of selected bones after cremation, in which no DNA can persist because they've been subjected to high heat. And there is also evidence of symbolic burials in which the bones are completely absent. There's just some sort of offering, right? And like I said, there is strong evidence that cemetery burial was limited almost exclusively to first generation migrants to the valley, to the society, to the civilization. Because if you have a large, prosperous civilization, you will have immigrants coming in, right? And the immigrants will have different cultures. Probably the Indus Valley civilization people used to cremate their dead, but the immigrants may have buried their dead. So first generation immigrants would have buried their dead, and maybe that's what we have found. So basically this raises a strong possibility that DNA retrieved from such burials may not represent the Indus Valley civilization's population at all. Right. So the author is clearly ignorant about this, or otherwise he intentionally neglects to mention this important fact. So that's one more thing about this. And then the funny thing is that DNA doesn't reveal your language or your religion, right? I mean, if I were to learn French, will my DNA change? It won't change. If a French person were to learn Hindi, their DNA won't change. If a missionary converts an Indian Hindu to Christianity, the guy's DNA won't change. It will still stay Indian. So DNA does not it does not reveal the language you speak or the religion you practiced. But the author says that basically claims that DNA reveals language as well as religion. So that's just ridiculous. And then the author says that R1A1A is the Aryan gene, which we as we just discussed, it's complete nonsense. It's present, it's found in high frequencies in North Indians and South Indians, in high castes and low castes and tribals everywhere. Actually, what we have found is that it's found in higher frequencies among certain tribes, a tribe in Madhya Pradesh and a tribe in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So certain tribes seem to have a higher percentage of the population exhibiting this particular lineage than the national average. So clearly, this is not a. So clearly, it's not the Aryan gene. It's the Indian gene, you could say, right? So basically, Dravidians carry this gene, Dalits carry this gene, scheduled tribes carry this gene. So according to this terminology and logic, you should call R1A1A the pre-Aryan gene if an Aryan invasion actually happened, right? And then the author says that the R1A1A lineage originated in the steppe, which means the Central Asian steppe. So as we already discussed just now, it did not originate in the steppe. It originated 15,000 years plus ago in India. Now, it's true that this lineage is found in the Central Asian and Central Asian steppe, and it is also true that it is very possible that Central Asian genes may have come into India at some point in time, because see, civilization is about it's about inflow and outflow. It's not a linear process. There are several waves of migrations and people coming in, people going out, people migrating forever somewhere, etc. So it's very possible that Central Asian genes came into India and they may have carried the R1A1A lineage. But it's important to remember that the R1A1A lineage reached Central Asia long ago from India itself. So it's like it returned to India via a circuitous path. So so basically, that's another fallacy in this paper that has been published. I mean, this paper received a lot of publicity. That's why I had to write a rebuttal about it, and that's why it probably represents everything these people are trying to prove. So the other thing is that the author has resorted to personal attacks against the scientists who are doing this research. For example, the author says that he accuses Dr. Rai of prevaricating. He claims that Dr. Shinde is given to dropping broad hints. He accuses Dr. Shinde of dissembling, of threatening and arm twisting the American geneticist David Reich over access to ancient DNA samples, and of forcing him to change terminology in a paper which they co-authored. He makes several other accusations. He accuses the Indian team of having discomfort with politically inconvenient results, and he accuses the Indian scientists Lalji Singh and Thangaraj of forcing Reich to resort to sleight of hand, terminological sleight of hand. So it's a whole bunch of strange accusations that are made without any evidence at all. So the author is essentially siding with this American researcher, Reich, and he is indulging in character assassination of an entire team of Indian scientists without any credible evidence at all. So it's actually quite clear. It doesn't take a genius to understand at whose behest he has written this thing. He's basically writing it on the behest of the Western academia, basically, it looks like. And it's known that the lead researcher at Harvard, David Reich, he is a well-known proponent of the Aryan Invasion Theory. He has been very vocal about it, and he's actually infamous for making political remarks about Hindutva and implicitly comparing it with Nazi ideology. So So basically, he has political opinions which may be clouding his judgment and his results. A scientist should never dabble in politics if it is going to influence his work. And we know that nearly all the Western researchers, be they geneticists or historians, they all support the Aryan Invasion Theory, either implicitly or explicitly. And so do most Indian researchers who work abroad, even though some of them may be doing it because they have no other option. So this article's extensive quoting of Reich and championing his research and opinions kind of reveals a hidden nexus between India's Marxist academia and left liberal, etc., ecosystem and Western pro-Aryan invasion theory academics and India's mainstream media. It looks like a very big collaboration that's going on. So basically, that's what this paper is about. It's a big litany of lies and insinuations and character assassination, and there's no real science in it. It's a very poor attempt at propaganda, and this is the kind of article that's been coming out again and again and again in recent times.
Yeah, I want to touch upon this. This actually bothers me a lot, and like a trend in most scientific discussions in India. I know the left-wing scientific discourse and left-wing politically leaning journalists. They always have this claim to moral superiority, and they'll self-declare themselves as the neutral observer in the entire process, as if they're as if when they were born and they got indoctrinated in left-wing ideology. Somebody took a stamp and said, "Thappa, now you are neutral." I mean, it's ridiculous. I think I again want to touch upon this aspect in our last podcast where, I had specifically asked you a question that what if the Deccan College result is not according to your liking? And what I liked was you said, to fir maan lenge na, nahi hai.
What's the problem?
Yeah, and you had very clearly and honestly admitted, and that's my view. To me, it does not reduce the value of Indian civilization, considering that there were few people who came in a few thousand years ago. It doesn't reduce. But the point is not whether they came in from outside or they came in from here and went there. The point is what the damn truth is. And no, we want to know the truth. We want people to speak about the truth. And this bothers me. And now I want to connect and talk about a larger generation. But before that, a couple of people, I think one guy has asked a question. He's watching it live, Amir Joshi. He says R1A is 15,000 years old in India, but R1A1 is 4,000 years old. So can you ask him specifically about R1A1 subclad? Is that true?
So subclade is basically a subset of a family. So see, haplogroups are, like I said, they are bloodlines or lineages which begin with a certain individual at a certain point in time. It's an extended family which has descended from this certain individual, from a particular individual. So haplogroups are named after letters of the alphabet and numbers. So you have haplogroups called A, B, C, D, E, etc. And then you have subgroups, which are sub-branches of the family, which are named as A1A, B2B, B2C, etc. So you have letters of the alphabet and you have numbers. So there is this haplogroup called haplogroup R. So it has a subgroup called R1, which has a subgroup called R1A, and going forward we have R1A1A, which happens to be the world's most successful haplogroup in terms of number of members it has produced. So the thing is, there are several papers out there, genetic papers, which make differing claims. Some claim that the most popular one among the Western researchers is the result that claims that the R1A star means whatever after that. The R1A star haplogroup originated somewhere in Iran sometime around 5,800 years ago. So that's one result, but there are other papers which have a bigger data set, which clearly prove that the haplogroup originated in India. So there's one paper which was published in the journal Nature, which is the world's most preeminent scientific publishing journal. And there's another paper which has actually a bigger data set, which also corroborates the results of the Nature paper, and it also basically comes to a similar conclusion with a slightly different age. So one paper says it's 15,450 years, and another paper says it's around 18,000 years. But both of these papers demonstrate, they conclude that this haplogroup originated in India all these years ago. So as long as the results of those two papers are not invalidated, it remains the truth. It remains the most probable result that this haplogroup originated in India. So there are studies going on all the time. People are trying to find more data, more ancient DNA, etc. So let this happen, right? If they're able to prove the results wrong, then we will accept that. No problem. But as of now, what we know is this, like what I just said.
Well, all right, cool. Now I want to talk about something general, and we'll take questions in the end. So, guys, you are watching it. So, whenever I'll take some of your questions too, specifically, and I'll pass them on to Abhijit, and he'll answer it live. But I have one last question to you, Abhijit, and this is regarding the general discussion on science in India. Okay. Now, whether it's the left wing or whether it's the right wing, so like I was mentioning just a while ago, science should be about the pursuit of what's true and what is the most probable answer, considering all the evidence acquired from different forms of knowledge systems, like what we call it a nomological network of cumulative evidence. That, let's take Aryan invasion for example. Now you gave 3 lines of evidence, right? You use the genetic example, you use the linguistic example, you use the archaeological example, and then we can create a nomological network where we can judge this evidence and make a claim. Now my problem is, okay, the left is politicized, but when we look at the non-left in India, and when we talk about the attitude to science, there's a lot of mediocrity in that discourse too. Now, every time somebody comes up with a great scientific discovery, you'll be hearing nonsense like, ये तो हमारे ancient scriptures में पहले से लिखा हुआ है. And what I want you to talk about now is, and I'm going to use a very specific example here. So I'm going to read a shairi, a very small line out of a shairi by Mirza Ghalib. So anybody who's going to listen to this, I'm going to give you Ghalib shairi and then I'm going to give you a translation. So Ghalib says, asle shahudo shahido mashhud ek hai, हैरान हूँ फिर मुशाहिदा है किस हिसाब में. What it means is the observer, the act of observation, and the object under observation, they are all the same. So I do not know what constitutes observation. Now, basically, if anybody has even an inkling of knowledge of quantum mechanics or quantum physics, they will know that this is basically the claim of quantum mechanics. But we're not going to say that Ghalib was a quantum physicist, right? We're not going to do that. So if that is going to be the standard we're going to take for Mirza Ghalib, why won't we do it for the others? Because science is obviously more than just writing lines, right? It is about hypotheses, then testing it, and then replicating the results, and then it calls itself a theory. I mean, the weight of evidence is far more. So how do we solve this problem? Because I genuinely believe India has contributed a lot in reality when it comes to science and maths. But how do we, as they say, how do we separate the bullshit from the real achievement? So what are your views on that?
So my view is that, first of all, Indians have this instinctive awareness of the antiquity of their civilization and the fact that there were great achievements in the past. There's this instinctive awareness of that. So they believe that, many of them believe, whether rightly or wrongly, that everything originated from India. And it's true that much of mathematics, astronomy, science, many disciplines of science, etc., they all began in India. I mean, before any other civilization started exploring those things, we started exploring them. We have evidence of that. There's no doubt about that. Now, when you claim that certain things were first done in India, you need to have evidence of that. Clear, concrete evidence of that. Like when you say the Pythagorean theorem was first discovered by Bodhayana. So we have evidence of that. There is textual evidence that proves the result of Pythagoras, that demonstrates the proof of Pythagoras is result in India, and before it was discovered by Pythagoras. And similarly for calculus and trigonometry, the sine, the cosine, all those things were discovered in India much before they were rediscovered in Europe. Now, how the process of that happened, it's a different story. But the truth is that there is some truth in the fact that many things were there in India before, and they probably were transmitted by various means to the West. Now, when you claim that quantum physics was there in India, or maybe you had airplanes or aircraft in India, I mean, you need to have concrete evidence of that. I mean, do we have any ruins or any spare parts or something that demonstrates, that proves that there was an airplane that was constructed in India, and is there any evidence that it flew? So we don't have that, right? We have a text called the Vyamanika Shastra, I believe, which seems to, I've not read it. Okay, so but it seems to have different models of airplanes and different propulsion systems, etc. And people use this to claim that India had flying machines in the past. So the thing is that correlation is not causation, right? If you have a textbook, it doesn't mean that it means that we had these things. Maybe it's something that it's like science fiction, right? You write comic, people produce comics and science fiction stories and novels and all. So maybe this represents that. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not making a claim, but what I'm saying is that correlation is not causation. We don't have evidence that we had flying machines in India. Now, why do people make these strange claims? It's because their thought process doesn't allow them to discriminate between right and wrong. They don't have the necessary critical thinking required to make this differentiation. Essentially, what they lack is the right mental model. So, when you talk about something called the scientific method, it is basically a kind of a mental model which allows you to think critically, right? So, if people are taught the scientific method at an early age, then they will be able to use it to discriminate between absurd things and things that can be proven, or things that can make sense. So it's about your education system and how you were educated. Now, obviously, it's difficult to teach a different way of thinking to somebody who's grown up, because your formative years and what you are taught in that time, that affects the way you are for the rest of your life. So what we can do is we cannot change the mindsets of most adults in India, but what we can do is we can change the education system and incorporate learning about science from an early age in all children. I mean, basically, something like the scientific method is actually quite simple. A 9-year-old, 10-year-old can be taught that, and they will understand what it is. It's a very simple sequence of actions that you have to perform. So if something like that is taught to children from an early age, then the future adults of the country will have the so-called scientific temper, right? That's been talked about since Nehruvian times. So that's what I can suggest, that teach kids the right things. Right now, our education system is so bad; it's broken, and what it does is that it destroys children's minds from a very very early age. It stamps out all curiosity, all intelligence, and it places broken mental models in their head. It uploads the wrong software in their heads, and that software persists for the rest of their lives. So you need reforms in education if you want to get over this problem that we have. I mean, lots of people, it's not right wing or left wing, it's everyone, The leftists, the thing about the leftists is that they all dance to one tune because they have an agenda. They have a very clear agenda, and they know what they're doing, and they collaborate on it, on that thing. And the other wing, the non-left wing, they are all in different directions. They are like unpolarized magnet. Everybody is pointing in different directions, and so there seems to be kind of chaos in their thinking and in their pronouncements and all that. But my observation is that it's prevalent everywhere. But the thing which I have also observed in India is that people are very curious about science. I mean, you look at lay people, they are very curious. So this curiosity is there, this this fascination with science is there. People want to know about it. They are curious about it. They want to understand it. They want to keep abreast of the latest developments that are happening in science, and which is a good thing. People are fascinated about topics like quantum physics and black holes and cosmology and dark matter and dark energy and the God particle and gravitational waves, and quantum computing, super computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so many more things. So people, and I've seen people try to learn about it from whatever sources they can learn from. They try to read about it from newspaper articles, or online articles, or from YouTube, or open courseware programs, which are there today online for free, right? So people do try to learn these things. They have this curiosity, but the problem is that they do not have the right algorithm going on in their mind. So they're not able to absorb they may be able to absorb the information, but they're not able to process it properly. And that's what creates these gaps in knowledge and the flawed logic, unfortunately, which is there in their mental models. It causes them to come to the wrong conclusions, and then then they make these pronouncements which you referred to. So that's my understanding of what's going on.
This is something very interesting. As you were talking about it, somebody actually asked a question, and this is the problem in India. So the gentleman, whoever has asked the question, has said, what about Shushruta plastic surgery claim and Ganesha example? Now look at the irony in this. Shushruta has a proper Samhita, and that is a solid claim of plastic surgery in India.
Yes.
Now, in the same question, we have clubbed the Ganesha story.
Which Ganesha story?
भाई भगवान गणेश का सर जो हमने लगा दिया ना, वो भी प्लास्टिक सर्जरी हो गई अभी. So that is my problem. Exactly. This is such a classic case of our problem in this country, where Shushruta is a completely different thing. I think he has written steps of how to go about, doing it. So that's scientific, because Shushruta has not just made a claim. Now, why can't we look at the Ganesha story as an archetype? It's hilarious that, Indians talk about Carl Jung and archetypes. If there was ever a civilization that made archetypes sexy, it was India. The entire pantheon of Indian literature is so deep and is so full of archetypes. It's actually sad to speak. But now I want to read a question to you. So somebody has asked why Indians are such hypocrites that they wish to take credit for everything, for the things for which they have not taken efforts. So many healthcare related blind faiths are prevalent. What can be done according to you?
What can be done is we have to educate the next generation. The current generation is lost, I would say. I mean, it's very difficult to educate people who have grown up and who have already absorbed certain ways of thinking. It's very, very difficult to change once you reach a certain age, you become set in your ways. You just won't change, So what you have to do is you have to take care of the next generation, the future generations. You have to reform the education system, and you have to instill the right way of thinking in them, the critical thought, curiosity, and the scientific method. I mean, they should understand basic science. I'm not asking them to understand quantum physics, but they should understand basic math, for example, And again, in math, you don't have to understand differential calculus or tensor algebra. You have to understand basic math, like arithmetic, whatever the basic math you need in life, so that you don't make ridiculous mistakes in math. And similarly, you should absorb ideas like the scientific method, and you should be exposed to different kinds of science. Pure sciences like physics and mathematics, applied sciences like chemistry and computer science, etc. You should have a wide range of things that you're exposed to as a child, and you should be allowed to explore these in a self-directed way, out of your own curiosity. I mean, things should not be forced down your throat. So what happens today is that there is a one-size-fits-all model in Indian education. All kids have to just go to the same meat grinder, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it hammers out their curiosity, it hammers out their intellect, their ability to think critically. I mean, just see, we have all gone through it, right? May I come in, teacher? May I stand up, teacher? May I sit down, teacher? May I drink water, teacher? May I go into PP teacher? I mean, you have to take permission for everything. It transforms children into robots. Complete obedience, unquestioning obedience. Don't ask questions. If you can't ask questions, then how will you think, right? So there are these fundamental flaws in India's education system, which produces the kind of thinking that this the question refers to, right? I mean, people make all kinds of illogical claims. The ability to think logically is absent in many people, unfortunately, because of the way they are educated. For example, I'll tell you, what? If 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 you're in the seventh standard and if you have to draw a scientific diagram of some kind of some experiment, you have to reproduce it exactly as it is in the textbook. Now, if the apparatus is like this and you draw it like that, you will get 0 marks in the exam. Even though if you keep the apparatus like that, it will still work. But if you don't reproduce the thing exactly as it is in the textbook, you will not get any marks. So even though the child may have understood the process, the principle behind and the science behind the experiment which is being drawn in the diagram, and which is what enables the child to draw it in a different inclination angle, etc., but it will it will be deemed to be wrong because it is not exactly the way it is in the textbook. And I don't blame the teachers. They went through the same thing, right? They also suffer from the same inadequacies and the same worldview. So they continue what they went through, and it's a self-perpetuating system which we have. It needs to be broken. It needs to be rectified at some stage. You need deep fundamental reforms in the way things are done in education. So this is what causes the problem.
Yeah, so one more question. Someone had asked earlier on, which was actually a very good question in terms of the Aryan invasion theory. So when did the Europeans discover these linguistic similarities between Sanskrit and other Indo-European languages? So they had asked you this question. When was this?
I think the first time they noticed this was sometime in the 16th or 17th centuries.
Yeah, the French guy. Around that. The first was the French guy who had found out. I think it was either in the 16th century or the 17th century. Yeah, you're right.
I think the first time somebody lectured about this, you're right, there was some French guy, some priest, some Jesuit priest or something like that. I'm not sure exactly who he was. But the first time someone lectured about it academically was in the 18th century, sometime in the 18th century. There was a judge in the British Supreme Court in Calcutta. His name was William Jones. So he's the one who first lectured on the similarities between Latin and Greek and Sanskrit. So that's in the 18th century and in the late 18th century, I believe. And after that, this term Indo-European languages first appeared in academia, and Indo-European studies began as an academic discipline sometime in the early 19th century. So that's the chronology of the event.
All right, cool. So I have a rule. I usually try to wrap things up in an hour, and we have reached the hour's mark. So I apologize to everyone. I hope we have kind of covered. I think we have extensively covered the whole pantheon of Aryan invasion. So just a few passing comments. If there is some new development, definitely I'll re-invite Abhijit again, and we will update that, because see, in any subject which involves scientific research and scientific papers, we'll have to do it again and again. As new evidence comes in, we'll have to talk about it again. That's why we did this discussion again, because the specific discussion about the Rakhigadi evidence was very important. So and I'm grateful to Abhijit that, and he's been very open. He's like, whenever new evidence comes, I'll come back and we'll talk about it. And I want to end this by requesting everyone that every culture has this problem, that all the answers came from my culture. It's okay. Every culture will give you certain solutions to every problem. Sometimes you might find cases where the Indians came up with the same conclusions, and independently the Chinese and the Greek and the Egyptians also came up with the same conclusions independently. That doesn't mean that you are less important or they are more important. Also, that does not mean that you should not claim and glorify the things that have been achieved by the Indian culture. But whenever you claim something, it has to be based on evidence. make sure that your civilizational pride is not like homeopathic medicine. Make sure that it is much more than homeopathy. And now I'm waiting for the homeopathic trolls to go after my life. So on that very positive note, Abhijit, once again, thanks a lot for doing this, and let's see where this research goes, my dear friend.
Thank you so much for having me again. I would love and I would like to congratulate you on the success of your podcast. It's becoming really popular. You're doing a really great job. So keep doing it. Great job, man.
Thanks a lot, my friend, and thank you everyone whosoever going to watch it live, whosoever's watched it live, who's going to watch it later or going to listen to it on SoundCloud. Thanks a lot. If you like what I discuss over here, please share it with other people because we have a paucity of decent discussions. So on that note, goodbye. Have a nice day. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.